Hey guys, tonight we're stepping aboard the world's most famous luxury ship to discover what the richest passengers on the Titanic really ate before the disaster changed history forever. If you enjoy relaxing history stories that help you unwind and fall asleep, please subscribe to the channel and join me on this peaceful journey into the past. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine it is April 1912. The ocean is calm. The engines hum steadily beneath your feet. And you have just been invited to dine in the magnificent first class restaurant aboard the Titanic. While most people remember the ship because of its tragic ending, very few know that it also offered some of the finest food ever served at sea. The wealthy passengers did not simply eat to satisfy their hunger. Every meal was a grand social event where elegance, status, and luxury mattered almost as much as the food itself. The dining saloon sparkled beneath enormous chandeliers that reflected warm light across polished wooden walls and beautifully decorated tables. White tablecloths stretched perfectly across each table. Silver cutlery gleamed under the lights, and crystal glasses waited to be filled by attentive stewards, dressed in spotless uniforms. Every chair was carefully arranged before the guests arrived, and every napkin was folded with remarkable precision. Soft conversations mixed with the gentle sound of violins drifting through the ship, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a luxurious palace than a vessel. Crossing the Atlantic Ocean, first class, passengers rarely worried about what would be served because the Titanic employed highly trained chefs who had previously worked in some of Europe's finest hotels. Fresh ingredients had been loaded before departure, including expensive meats, fresh vegetables, fruits, cheeses, butter, cream, and countless bottles of fine wine. Large refrigerated storage rooms helped preserve these foods throughout the voyage, allowing the kitchen staff to prepare meals that rivaled the finest restaurants in London or Paris. Dinner often included many separate courses rather than a single meal. Guests might begin with delicate oysters, served on ice before moving on to a rich cream soup filled with seasonal vegetables. After that came perfectly cooked fish accompanied by elegant sauces, followed by tender lamb, roast duck, beef, or other carefully prepared meats. Each plate was presented beautifully, almost like a work of art, because appearance was considered just as important as flavour. Between courses, guests talked about business, politics, travel, and the exciting future that awaited them in America. For many wealthy families, these dinners were opportunities to build friendships and display refinement rather than simply enjoy delicious food. Dessert tables offered an astonishing variety of sweet treats, fresh peaches, grapes, oranges, elegant pastries, rich puddings, French ice cream, chocolate creations, and delicate cakes filled the room with irresistible aromas. Some passengers finished their meals with imported cheeses, fresh fruit, coffee, or expensive cigars while continuing their conversations late into the evening, completely unaware that only a few nights later the same luxurious dining room would stand silent beneath the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. Many of the ingredients served aboard the Titanic had travelled almost as far as the passengers themselves. Exotic fruits arrived from warmer climates, while fine cheeses, wines, and specialty foods were carefully selected before the ship departed from Southampton. Nothing was purchased casually. Every item had been chosen to impress wealthy travellers who expected the very best, no matter where they were in the world. The kitchen itself was a remarkable operation. Hundreds of cooks, bakers, butchers, and kitchen assistants worked tirelessly below deck, long before sunrise and often long after midnight. Giant ovens baked fresh bread throughout the day, filling the corridors with the comforting smell of warm loaves and buttery pastries. Massive pots simmered with soups and sauces while skilled chefs carefully inspected every dish before it left the kitchen. Timing was everything. A delay of only a few minutes could ruin an elegant dinner, served to hundreds of demanding first-class guests. The stewards moved quickly through narrow passageways, balancing heavy trays filled with expensive china and crystal glasses. They practiced walking smoothly despite the gentle movement of the ship, making it appear effortless even during busy meal times. Every guest expected flawless service, and the crew worked hard to ensure that no glass remained empty for long. Some wealthy passengers requested special dishes that were not listed on the menu. Whenever possible, the chefs happily prepared them, understanding that excellent service was one of the reasons people chose to sail aboard such a prestigious vessel. Breakfast was equally impressive. Instead of a simple meal, first-class travellers could enjoy eggs prepared in several different styles, smoked fish, grilled meats, fresh fruit, pastries, porridge, pancakes, toast with imported jams, and freshly brewed coffee or tea. Many guests spent more than an hour enjoying breakfast while reading newspapers or chatting with friends. Lunch offered another generous selection, including roast meats, fresh seafood, salads, elegant desserts, and carefully prepared vegetables. For many wealthy passengers, eating aboard the Titanic felt less like travelling and more like staying in one of the finest luxury hotels in the world, where every meal reminded them of their social status and extraordinary privilege. Although first-class passengers enjoyed remarkable luxury, very few of them ever visited the busy kitchens where all this food was prepared. Those areas were hot, noisy, and filled with constant activity. Huge sacks of flour were carried from storage rooms. Fresh meat was carefully butchered. Vegetables were peeled by hand, and dozens of cooks worked shoulder to shoulder to keep every meal on schedule. The contrast between the peaceful dining room and the exhausting work below deck was striking. While wealthy guests laughed over another glass of wine, the kitchen staff hurried through endless hours of demanding labour without ever becoming part of the elegant experience they created. The Titanic's bakery was one of the busiest places on the ship. Bakers woke long before dawn to prepare fresh rolls, bread, cakes, biscuits, and pastries so everything would be ready before breakfast. The smell of freshly baked bread drifted through nearby corridors every morning, welcoming passengers as they began another day at sea. Butter was spread generously, jams were served in beautiful dishes, and delicate pastries were arranged with great care. Nothing was meant to look ordinary. Every meal reflected. The White Star lines promised that the Titanic represented the highest standard of luxury travel. Even the table settings reinforced this message. Fine porcelain plates, polished silverware, crystal glasses, and embroidered napkins created an atmosphere that reminded guests of Europe's grand hotels. Many passengers dressed formally for dinner, with gentlemen wearing black, tuxedos and ladies appearing in elegant gowns, decorated with pearls and fine jewellery. For a few hours each evening, the dining saloon became the social heart of the ship, where important conversations, business deals, and new friendships unfolded beneath sparkling lights, no one sitting comfortably at those beautifully decorated tables could imagine that within days the magnificent dining room would be abandoned forever, leaving behind only silence beneath the icy Atlantic waters. As the evening of April 14th drew to a close, many first-class passengers finished another magnificent dinner without the slightest hint of danger. Waiters cleared away the final plates, coffee was served, and quiet conversations continued beneath the warm glow of electric lights. Outside, however, the North Atlantic had become unusually calm and bitterly cold. The contrast was extraordinary. Inside the ship, luxury and comfort remained untouched, while beyond the steel walls an invisible threat drifted silently through the dark waters, growing closer with every passing minute. When the Titanic struck the iceberg at 11:40 that night, the elegant routines that had defined first-class life came to an abrupt end. The luxurious dining saloon, which had been filled with laughter only hours before, slowly emptied as passengers noticed the strange vibration that passed through the ship. At first, few believed anything serious had happened. Some assumed the engines had simply been stopped for a routine inspection, while others continued reading, playing cards, or enjoying quiet conversations in the lounges. The crew also worked carefully to avoid causing unnecessary panic. Stewards politely knocked on cabin doors and asked guests to put on warm clothing and life jackets, often reassuring them that it was only a precaution. Many wealthy travellers hesitated because they had complete confidence in the Titanic's reputation as the safest and most luxurious ship ever built. Some even joked about the interruption, unwilling to leave the comfort of their beautifully furnished cabins. Expensive evening gowns, tailored suits, sparkling jewellery, and polished shoes replaced the relaxed clothing many had planned to wear before bed. The grand staircase, usually a symbol of elegance, became crowded with passengers quietly making their way toward the upper decks. Even then, the atmosphere remained surprisingly calm. The ship's musicians continued, performing gentle melodies to comfort those waiting outside, while officers organised people into orderly lines near the lifeboats. Looking back, it is almost impossible to imagine how quickly everything changed. Only a short time earlier, these same passengers had been discussing fine wines, delicious desserts, and plans for their arrival in New York. Now they stood beneath a freezing sky, surrounded by the endless darkness of the Atlantic Ocean. The luxurious meals, the crystal glasses, the silver cutlery, and the magnificent dining rooms no longer mattered. Wealth could purchase the finest food on earth, but it could not stop icy sea water from filling the ship. In those final hours, the differences between rich and poor began to disappear, replaced by a single shared struggle for survival that would forever become one of history's most unforgettable tragedies. When dawn finally arrived, the magnificent meals that had once symbolized luxury were nothing more than distant memories. The tables that had displayed silver dishes and elegant desserts would never welcome guests again. The freezing Atlantic had claimed not only a great ship but also countless dreams, reminding the world that no amount of wealth, comfort, or fine dining could overcome the power of nature. Even today, the story of Titanic's first-class dining remains a fascinating glimpse into a world that disappeared forever on that cold April night. Although the Titanic's first class menus have survived in museums and private collections, they represent much more than lists of luxurious dishes. They offer a rare glimpse into a vanished world where elegance, tradition, and social status shaped every detail of daily life. Historians studying these menus have discovered how carefully each meal was planned, from the order of the courses to the wines selected for different dishes. French culinary traditions heavily influenced the cuisine because French cooking was considered the highest standard of luxury during the early 20th century. Many menu items carried French names, even when the ingredients themselves came from Britain or other parts of Europe. This added an air of sophistication that wealthy passengers expected. Every dinner reflected not only exceptional cooking but also the cultural values of an era that celebrated refinement and ceremony. The White Star Line understood that food played an important role in attracting affluent travellers, so no expense was spared in creating unforgettable dining experiences. Looking back today, it is remarkable to think that people once crossed the Atlantic, surrounded by such extraordinary comfort while having no idea they were taking part in one of history's final great ocean liner voyages. The Titanic's luxurious meals have become symbols of both incredible human achievement and heartbreaking loss. They remind us that even during moments of comfort and celebration, history can change in an instant. More than a century later, these menus continue to fascinate people around the world, allowing us to imagine what it must have felt like to sit beneath the glittering lights of the grand dining saloon, enjoying an elegant meal while the vast Atlantic stretched endlessly beyond the ship, hiding a fate that none of the passengers could possibly foresee. Perhaps that is why the Titanic continues to capture our imagination more than a century later. It was never just a ship, and its famous meals were never just about food. They represented a world filled with confidence, luxury, and the belief that human engineering could conquer nature. Every carefully prepared course, every polished silver spoon, and every beautifully decorated table reflected the hopes of an age that believed progress had no limits. Yet the events of that cold April night revealed how fragile even the greatest achievements could be. Today, whenever historians recreate the Titanic's first class menu or display one of the original dining cards, they are preserving more than recipes. They are preserving the memories of the people who gathered around those elegant tables for what they believed would be just another peaceful evening at sea, unaware that it would become their final dinner aboard the most famous ocean liner in history. As years passed, The story of the Titanic's dining experience became almost as legendary as the ship itself. Museums around the world began displaying original menus, elegant China cutlery, and photographs of the magnificent dining saloon, allowing modern visitors to step back into the atmosphere of April 1912. These carefully preserved objects tell a remarkable story without speaking a single word. A simple menu listing oysters, roast lamb, fresh asparagus, pastries, and fruit reminds us that ordinary moments often become the most powerful memories after extraordinary events. For the passengers, dinner was simply part of another pleasant evening at sea. No one paused to imagine that historians would study those menus more than a century later, or that people around the world would still be curious about every detail of what was served. The chefs who prepared those meals likely believed they were simply doing another day's work, never realizing that their creations would become part of one of history's most famous voyages. Even today, professional cooks occasionally recreate the Titanic's first class dinners using surviving recipes. Guests attending these special events often discover that the meals are surprisingly elegant, with rich sauces, carefully seasoned meats, delicacies, and beautifully balanced flavours that reflect the culinary traditions of the Edwardian era. While some ingredients and cooking methods have changed over time, the spirit of refinement remains remarkably familiar. These recreations offer more than a chance to taste history. They provide a quiet reminder of the lives that once filled the ship with conversation, laughter, and hope. Every recreated dish encourages us to imagine families gathering around beautifully decorated tables, travellers discussing their dreams of America, businessmen planning future opportunities, and children experiencing a grand adventure unlike anything they had ever known. For just a few peaceful days, the Titanic represented the very best that luxury ocean travel could offer. The tragedy that followed would forever overshadow those moments. Yet the memory of the ship's extraordinary hospitality continues to fascinate people across generations. Memoirs, the claiminess, remind us that history is not only made of battles and disasters, it is also made of ordinary evenings, shared meals, friendly conversations, and quiet moments that suddenly become unforgettable because of what happens next. Long after the Titanic disappeared beneath the icy Atlantic, its influence could still be seen throughout the world of ocean travel. Shipping companies carefully studied every detail of the disaster, introducing stricter safety regulations, additional lifeboats, and continuous radio watches to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. Yet alongside these important changes, another part of the Titanic's legacy quietly survived through its remarkable standard of hospitality. The ship had demonstrated that passengers expected more than transportation. They wanted comfort, beautiful surroundings, excellent service, and unforgettable dining experiences. Many luxury liners built during the following decades adopted similar ideas, creating elegant restaurants, grand staircases, and carefully planned menus, inspired by the Titanic's famous first-class service. Historians often point out that the ship represented the peak of Edwardian luxury, an era when formal dinners were important social occasions. Guests dressed in their finest clothing, followed detailed dining etiquette, and spent hours enjoying conversation between courses. Meals were never rushed. Every dish arrived at the proper moment. Every table was perfectly arranged. And every steward understood that exceptional service required patience and attention to detail. Looking back from the modern world, where meals are often eaten quickly, it is fascinating to imagine an evening that unfolded at such a relaxed pace. The Titanic encouraged passengers to slow down, appreciate each course, and enjoy the company of those around them. Perhaps this is one reason people remain captivated by its story. Beyond the famous tragedy lies a picture of everyday life aboard one of the most luxurious ships ever built. The elegant dining rooms, the carefully prepared meals, the gentle music drifting through the corridors, and the quiet conversations all remind us that history is filled with ordinary human moments as well as extraordinary events. Every surviving menu and every preserved photograph allows us to step back into that peaceful world for just a moment, imagining what it must have felt like to sit at one of those beautifully decorated tables while the great ship sailed confidently across the calm Atlantic, carrying hundreds of hopeful passengers toward a future they believed would soon begin in New York. Today, more than 100 years after the Titanic's voyage, people continue to recreate its famous first-class dinners not because they wish to celebrate luxury alone, but because food has a unique ability to connect us with the past. A menu can reveal what people valued, how they lived, and even what they dreamed about. Every carefully chosen ingredient tells a small part of a much larger story. The oysters served at the beginning of dinner, the rich soups, the roasted meats, the delicate desserts, and the fresh fruit all reflected an age of confidence and elegance. For the wealthy passengers, these meals represented the finest experiences money could buy. They expected every evening to be filled with comfort, excellent service, and refined conversation as the ship carried them across the Atlantic. None of them could have imagined that their final memories would one day become subjects of books, documentaries, museums, and historical research. The dining room that once echoed with laughter eventually became one of the countless silent rooms resting nearly 4 kilometers beneath the ocean's surface. The silverware, fine china, and crystal glasses that symbolized luxury disappeared into darkness, where they remained untouched for decades. Even so, the story of those elegant meals has never truly been lost. Surviving menus, eyewitness accounts, and historical records allow us to picture those remarkable evenings with surprising detail. They remind us that behind every famous historical event were ordinary people enjoying ordinary moments, completely unaware of what tomorrow would bring. Perhaps that is the most unforgettable lesson of the Titanic. Life can seem peaceful and predictable, yet history often changes without warning. A simple dinner shared with family or friends may later become one of the last happy memories before everything changes forever as we leave the grand dining saloon behind and quietly step away from the Titanic's beautifully decorated tables. We remember not only the luxury that once existed aboard the ship, but also the lives, hopes and dreams of the people who gathered there for one final, unforgettable meal beneath the soft glow of its magnificent lights. The fascination with the Titanic also reminds us that history is often preserved through the smallest details. While newspapers wrote about the sinking, historians later became interested in everyday life aboard the ship. They searched for menus, passenger diaries, letters, photographs, and personal memories because these simple objects revealed what life actually felt like during those peaceful days at sea. A menu was no longer just a list of dishes. It became evidence of a vanished world. Reading the names of soups, fish, roasted meats, vegetables, pastries, cheeses, and desserts allows us to imagine the sounds of cutlery gently touching fine porcelain, the quiet conversations between strangers who had only recently met, and the soft music floating through the elegant dining room. These details transform history from a collection of dates into a living experience. The first-class dining saloon itself was designed to impress from the very first moment a passenger entered. Large windows allowed daylight to brighten the room during breakfast and lunch, while hundreds of electric lights created a warm golden atmosphere during dinner. Beautiful carved wooden panels decorated the walls, and every table was positioned carefully to provide both comfort and privacy. Fresh flowers often added colour to the room, while polished silver reflected the light in every direction. The entire setting encouraged passengers to relax and enjoy the long crossing. Many travellers later wrote that meals aboard the Titanic were among the finest they had ever experienced, equal to those served in Europe's greatest luxury hotels. Not every wealthy passenger followed exactly the same routine. Some preferred quiet breakfasts served in their private suites, while others enjoyed meeting fellow travellers in the grand dining room. Afternoon tea became another cherished tradition. Delicate sandwiches, fresh cakes, warm scones, biscuits, and steaming tea were served while passengers discussed politics, business, literature, or simply admired the endless ocean outside. These peaceful moments reflected a slower pace of life that is difficult to imagine today. There were no mobile phones, no internet, and no constant stream of news demanding attention. People spoke face to face, read books, wrote letters, played cards, and enjoyed long conversations that lasted for hours. For the crew working behind the scenes, however, luxury required constant effort. After every meal, countless plates, glasses, and pieces of silverware had to be washed, polished, counted, and prepared again for the next service. Storerooms were inspected, fresh ingredients organised, and kitchens cleaned before another busy day began. Bakers started work while most passengers were still asleep, ensuring that warm bread and pastries would be ready before sunrise. Butchers prepared fresh cuts of meat. Pastry chefs decorated desserts with remarkable precision, and waiters memorised seating arrangements. So every guest received flawless service. It was an enormous operation involving hundreds of dedicated workers whose names are rarely remembered today. Perhaps that is one of the quiet lessons hidden within the Titanic's story. The luxury admired by passengers depended upon the hard work of countless ordinary people who remained almost invisible Every elegant dinner required hours of preparation, teamwork, discipline, and skill, while guests admired beautifully presented meals. Dozens of cooks, cleaners, bakers, and stewards continued working below deck, making sure the next course arrived exactly on time. Their contribution became part of the ship's legacy, even if history has focused more often on its famous passengers than on the hard-working crew who served them. As our journey aboard the Titanic slowly comes to an end, it is worth remembering that history is not only about famous disasters, but also about the ordinary lives people lived before. Those moments occurred. The first-class passengers laughed over elegant dinners, admired the beauty of the Atlantic, and looked forward to arriving in New York. They celebrated birthdays, made business plans, shared family stories, and dreamed about the future, never imagining that their voyage would become one of the most studied events in modern history. The luxurious meals they enjoyed were prepared with extraordinary care, representing the highest standards of hospitality in the early 20th century. Although the ship itself was lost, these menus continue to survive as remarkable historical records, offering a glimpse into a world of refinement that disappeared beneath the waves. They remind us that behind every historical tragedy are real people whose daily routines were once filled with simple pleasures, warm conversations, and hopeful expectations. Perhaps that is why the story of Titanic's first class dining still captures our imagination today. It allows us to see the human side of history, where even a beautifully prepared dinner can become part of a story, remembered for generations, quietly connecting the past with the present, through memories that time has never completely erased. Even after more than a century, the Titanic continues to inspire historians, chefs, writers, and travellers because it represents far more than a luxurious ocean liner. It tells the story of an entire era when crossing the Atlantic was considered an elegant adventure rather than simply a means of transportation. Wealthy passengers expected every detail of their journey to reflect comfort and sophistication, and the dining experience was one of the greatest symbols of that lifestyle. Original menus reveal that meals changed from day to day so that guests would never become bored. Fresh ingredients were used whenever possible, and chefs constantly balanced rich flavours with lighter dishes to create memorable dining experiences. The presentation of each course was just as important as its taste. Plates were carefully arranged, sauces were poured with precision, and desserts were decorated beautifully before reaching the dining room. Such attention to detail demonstrated the pride the crew took in their work. Many passengers later remembered not only the impressive food but also the kindness and professionalism of the stewards who served them. They greeted guests politely, remembered personal preferences, and worked quietly so that every meal felt effortless. Looking back today, these moments remind us that true luxury was created not only by expensive ingredients but also by dedication, patience, and exceptional service. The Titanic may have vanished beneath the Atlantic, but the memories of those elegant dinners continue to survive through preserved menus, photographs, eyewitness accounts, and historical research. Every surviving detail allows us to picture another peaceful evening aboard the ship, when the dining room glowed with warm light. Conversations filled the air. Endpengers believed they were enjoying just another beautiful night on the world's finest ocean liner. It is a gentle reminder that history often hides within life's simplest moments, and that even an ordinary dinner can become unforgettable when viewed through the passage of time. Over the years, countless books and documentaries have explored the Titanic. Yet one simple truth always remains. The ship was filled with people who believed tomorrow would arrive just like any other day. They enjoyed remarkable meals, admired breathtaking sunsets over the Atlantic, and looked forward to seeing New York on the horizon. None of them realized they were living through moments that future generations would study in extraordinary detail. The surviving menus remind us not only of luxurious cuisine, but also of the hopes carried by every passenger seated around those elegant tables. They are silent witnesses to conversations that can never be heard again, celebrations that were never completed, and dreams that would never come true. Perhaps this is why the story of the Titanic's first-class dining still feels so powerful today. It reminds us to appreciate ordinary moments, shared meals, and the people sitting beside us, because history has shown that even the most peaceful evening can become unforgettable. And with that final thought, the lights in the grand dining saloon slowly fade, the music grows quiet, and the great ship continues its timeless voyage through our memories, forever remembered not only for how it ended, but also for how beautifully life was lived aboard it. If you were to stand inside the Titanic's first-class dining saloon today, you would probably notice something surprising. It was not only the expensive decorations or the luxurious meals that made the room feel extraordinary. It was the atmosphere created by hundreds of people sharing the same journey across the Atlantic. Every evening, passengers arrived wearing elegant clothing, exchanging friendly greetings as they found their assigned tables. Some had crossed the ocean many times before, while others were experiencing such luxury for the very first time. New friendships formed over dinner. Business partnerships began with casual conversations, and families celebrated special occasions together beneath the warm glow of electric lights. For a few peaceful hours, the worries of everyday life seemed far away. Outside, endless waves rolled gently beneath the ship, while inside the dining room laughter and conversation blended with the quiet sounds of silver, cutlery and fine china. The chefs rarely prepared exactly the same meal twice. They believed variety was an essential part of luxury, so each day's menu offered different combinations of soups, seafood, roasted meats, vegetables, desserts, and fresh fruit. Many ingredients had been carefully loaded before departure, while others were stored in refrigerated rooms designed to keep food fresh. Throughout the voyage, considering the technology available in 1912, this was an impressive achievement. The Titanic functioned almost like a floating city, carrying enough food to feed thousands of passengers and crew members every single day. Enormous quantities of meat, fish, butter, flour, sugar, eggs, milk, tea, coffee, and fresh produce disappeared into the kitchens, where skilled workers transformed them into elegant meals from early morning until late at night. Behind every beautifully presented dinner stood an army of hard-working people whose efforts were rarely noticed. Bakers shaped hundreds of loaves before sunrise. Pastry chefs carefully decorated desserts by hand. Kitchen porters carried heavy supplies through narrow corridors. Stewards memorized guests' preferences so that service appeared smooth and effortless. Their goal was simple. Every passenger should feel as though the ship existed solely for their comfort. It was a remarkable standard of hospitality, one that helped establish the Titanic's legendary reputation long before the disaster occurred. Today, when historians study these meals, they see more than luxurious recipes. They see evidence of an entire way of life that has almost disappeared. Formal dinners lasting several hours, carefully observed etiquette, multiple courses served one after another, and unhurried conversations were all part of a culture that valued patience and refinement. The surviving menus allow us to step into that lost world for a brief moment, imagining what it must have felt like to enjoy one final elegant dinner aboard the most famous ship ever built, completely unaware that history was quietly waiting just beyond the darkness of the Atlantic night. Although the Titanic's first class dining rooms existed for only a few short days, they left behind a legacy that continues to influence how people imagine luxury travel. Even modern cruise ships often draw inspiration from the elegance that once defined the great ocean liners of the early 20th century. Formal restaurants, attentive waiters, beautifully prepared meals, and grand staircases all echo traditions that passengers aboard the Titanic would have recognized immediately. Yet there is something unique about the Titanic that no other ship can fully recreate. Every surviving menu carries an emotional weight because we know the ending of the story, while the passengers did not. That difference changes the way we view every detail of their journey. A simple breakfast becomes more meaningful because it may have been someone's last peaceful morning. An afternoon tea shared with friends becomes unforgettable because those friends may never have met again. After that night, even a slice of cake or a cup of coffee takes on new significance when seen through the lens of history. Researchers continue to discover fascinating details from letters, diaries, and eyewitness accounts written by passengers and crew. These personal memories help us understand that the people aboard the Titanic were not merely names in history books. They were parents, children, newly married couples, businessmen, musicians, cooks, waiters, and travellers chasing new opportunities across the Atlantic. Many spoke excitedly about reaching New York, where new lives and fresh adventures awaited them. Others simply enjoyed the rare opportunity to experience one of the most luxurious ships ever constructed. For those fortunate enough to travel in first class, every meal reinforced the feeling that they were part of something extraordinary. Perhaps that is why the story of Titanic's dining experience still feels so timeless. It reminds us that history is not only remembered through dramatic events, but also through quiet human experiences, or shared meal, a friendly conversation, the aroma of fresh bread, the sound of gentle music, and the warm glow of elegant lights can survive in our imagination long after ships, buildings, and even entire generations have disappeared. In that sense, the Titanic's greatest legacy is not simply the tragedy that ended its voyage, but the vivid picture it leaves behind of everyday life aboard one of the most remarkable ships the world has ever known. As historians continue to examine the Titanic, they often return to one simple question: what did it actually feel like to live aboard the ship during those peaceful days before the disaster, while blueprints and photographs reveal what the rooms looked like? It is the memories of meals that bring the experience to life. Imagine sitting beside a large window as sunlight reflects across the calm Atlantic. A steward quietly pours fresh tea into delicate china cups while another serves warm bread straight from the bakery below deck. Around you, passengers speak in soft voices, discussing their plans for New York, sharing stories from home, or admiring the remarkable comfort of the ship. There is no sense of urgency. Time seems to move more slowly, allowing everyone to enjoy each course without interruption. For many wealthy travellers, this unhurried elegance was one of the greatest luxuries money could buy. The Titanic's dining service also reflected the customs of the Edwardian era, when formal manners were considered an essential part of everyday life among the upper classes. Guests waited patiently for each course, used a variety of carefully arranged silver utensils, and followed traditions that had been passed down for generations. Even the order in which dishes appeared was carefully planned to create a balanced and enjoyable meal. Soup was followed by fish, then meat, vegetables, desserts, fruit, cheese, and finally coffee. Every stage of the dinner was designed to feel effortless, even though hundreds of crew members worked continuously behind the scenes to make it possible. It is remarkable that so many of these details have survived. Original menus, passenger letters, newspaper interviews, and the memories of survivors allow us to reconstruct these evenings with surprising accuracy. They remind us that history is not only preserved in monuments or famous speeches, but also in ordinary routines that once seemed completely unimportant. A waiter carrying a tray, a baker preparing fresh rolls before sunrise, or a family sharing dessert together could never have imagined that their daily lives would one day become subjects of historical fascination. Yet those quiet moments now help us understand the human side of the Titanic better than almost anything else. Through them, the ship becomes more than a famous wreck resting beneath the sea. It becomes a place where real people laughed, dined, dreamed, and briefly believed they were aboard the safest and most magnificent ocean liner ever created. The deeper we explore the story of the Titanic, the easier it becomes to understand why people remain fascinated by its dining experience. Food has always been more than nourishment. It reflects culture, tradition, wealth, and the hopes of an entire generation. On board the Titanic, every carefully prepared meal represented confidence in the future. Passengers believed they were travelling on the finest ship ever constructed, surrounded by the highest level of comfort that modern engineering could provide. They admired the polished wood, the sparkling chandeliers, the elegant table settings, and the endless attention to detail that surrounded every meal. For them, these luxurious dinners were simply part of another unforgettable voyage across the Atlantic. One fascinating detail is that many ingredients served aboard the Titanic were considered rare delicacies in 1912. Fresh oysters, fine French cheeses, premium wines, exotic fruits, and carefully selected cuts of meat were expensive even for wealthy families on land. Transporting such ingredients across the ocean required careful planning and remarkable organisation. Refrigerated storage rooms, modern for their time, helped preserve food throughout the journey, while skilled chefs monitored quality every single day. Nothing was left to chance because the reputation of the White Star Line depended upon providing an experience unlike any other. Passengers often spent several hours enjoying dinner, moving slowly from one course to the next. There was no pressure to hurry between each dish. Conversations flowed naturally as orchestras played gentle music nearby. Some discussed politics, others shared travel stories, while many simply admired the peaceful Atlantic stretching endlessly beyond the windows. Looking back, these quiet evenings almost seem frozen in time. They remind us that history is often made of simple human experiences rather than dramatic moments alone. When archaeologists and researchers study the Titanic today, they pay attention not only to the ship itself, but also to these everyday details. Surviving menus, kitchen records, passenger diaries, and eyewitness accounts help recreate an atmosphere that photographs alone cannot capture. Together they reveal a world of elegance, patience, and remarkable craftsmanship that has largely disappeared from modern life. In many ways, the Titanic's dining experience represents the final chapter of an age when ocean travel itself was considered an event to be enjoyed rather than merely endured. Perhaps that is why these menus continue to capture our imagination. They remind us that behind every famous historical tragedy were ordinary evenings, filled with laughter, shared meals, hopeful conversations, and dreams of tomorrow. Long before the Titanic became a legend, it was simply a beautiful ship carrying people who believed they had many more peaceful dinners ahead of them. That quiet truth may be the most moving part of the entire story. As the years have passed, the Titanic has become far more than the story of a ship. It has become a window into an entire period of history, allowing us to understand how people lived, travelled, and dined during the early 20th century. Every preserved menu, every surviving photograph, and every personal diary adds another piece to this remarkable picture. Historians often explain that luxury aboard the Titanic was carefully designed to make passengers forget they were crossing one of the largest oceans in the world. Everything from the comfortable furniture to the elegant dining rooms encouraged relaxation and confidence, even when rough weather appeared during other voyages. Ships of this class were expected to provide the same high standard of service. Meals continued to be served with perfect etiquette. Orchestras continued playing soft music, and stewards carried out their duties with quiet professionalism. For first-class passengers, dinner was often the highlight of the day. It was an opportunity to wear elegant evening clothes, meet influential travellers, and enjoy recipes prepared by some of the finest chefs working at sea. Wealthy businessmen exchanged ideas about future investments. Families celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, and newly married couples imagined the exciting lives waiting for them in America. Children experienced foods they had never tasted before, while older travellers compared the Titanic with other famous ocean liners they had sailed on. Every table held its own conversations, creating hundreds of small stories that unfolded simultaneously beneath the warm lights of their grand dining saloon. Many historians believe the Titanic represented the peak of an era that would soon disappear forever. Only a few years later, the First World War would transform Europe and change the lives of millions of people. The world of former strict social etiquette and leisurely transatlantic voyages would gradually give way to a faster and very different age. In cette sense, the Titanic preserved the final moments of a society that still believed elegance, refinement, and tradition would continue unchanged into the future. Looking back today, we know that history had other plans. Perhaps that is why the ship continues to fascinate generation after generation. People are drawn not only to the tragedy, but also to the humanity hidden within it. The menus remind us that every historical event begins as an ordinary day. Someone enjoys breakfast, another person laughs over lunch, and families gather around beautifully prepared dinners without realizing they are creating memories that future generations will study with great care. The Titanic's first class dining experience therefore remains more than a symbol of luxury. It is a reminder that the simplest moments in life or shared meal, a quiet conversation, or a peaceful evening surrounded by loved ones can become the most meaningful memories of all. Even now, when visitors walk through Titanic museums or view carefully preserved artifacts, many find themselves drawn toward the original dining menus more than almost anything else. There is something deeply human about reading the exact foods that people expected to enjoy on an ordinary evening. Unlike machinery or engineering drawings, a menu speaks directly to everyday life. It reminds us that the passengers aboard the Titanic were not thinking about history. They were thinking about tomorrow's breakfast, tomorrow's conversations, and tomorrow's arrival in New York. Their world still felt safe, comfortable, and full of promise. The remarkable attention given to food aboard the Titanic reflected the growing popularity of luxury travel. During the early 20th century, ocean liners competed fiercely with one another, each company trying to attract wealthy travellers by offering larger cabins, finer restaurants, better service, and more elaborate menus. The White Star Line believed that comfort and elegance would encourage passengers to choose its ships again and again. Because of this, enormous effort went into planning every aspect of the dining experience. Chefs trained for years before earning positions aboard famous liners, and many had previously worked in prestigious European hotels. Their knowledge allowed them to prepare complicated dishes while serving hundreds of guests in a limited amount of time. Fresh bread continued to come from the ovens throughout the day, Pastries were carefully decorated by hand. Vegetables were prepared shortly before serving, and sauces were finished at the last possible moment to preserve their flavour. Such precision required perfect teamwork. Every cook, baker, waiter, and kitchen assistant depended on one another. If one part of the kitchen fell behind schedule, the entire dinner service could be affected. Yet surviving accounts suggest that the Titanic's kitchen staff performed their duties with remarkable efficiency, delivering meals that impressed even experienced international travellers. Perhaps the greatest irony is that many of these extraordinary efforts were remembered only because of the disaster that followed. Had the Titanic completed its voyage safely, its menus would likely have been forgotten like those of countless other ships. Instead, they became priceless historical documents, preserving a snapshot of daily life aboard one of the world's most famous ocean liners. Today, they allow us to imagine not only what wealthy passengers ate, but also how they felt as they gathered together each evening beneath sparkling lights, surrounded by fine china, polished silver, and the quiet confidence that tomorrow would be another peaceful day at sea. In Set V, the Titanic's dining tables continue to tell a story that reaches far beyond food, reminding us of the beauty, ambition, and fragile nature of human life itself. As historians piece together the final days of the Titanic, they often emphasize that the ship was designed to make every first-class passenger feel as though they were staying in one of the finest hotels in the world rather than travelling across a cold and unpredictable ocean. From the moment guests entered the dining saloon, every detail was intended to create a sense of calm and elegance. Gentle lighting reflected from polished wood panels. Soft music drifted through the room, and attentive stewards quietly anticipated every request before it was even spoken. This level of service was rare, even in many of Europe's greatest hotels, making the Titanic an unforgettable experience for those fortunate enough to travel in first class. One interesting aspect of the dining experience was the importance of conversation. Meals were not rushed because dining was considered a social occasion as much as a culinary one. Passengers discussed world events, business opportunities, literature, fashion, and their hopes for the future. Some had travelled across the Atlantic many times and exchanged stories about previous voyages, while others excitedly imagined the new lives waiting for them in America. These conversations created friendships that might have lasted for years, had history unfolded differently. Every evening the dining room became a place where strangers met. Ideas were shared, and memories were quietly formed. The chefs themselves rarely appeared before the guests. They remained below deck, working in intense heat for long hours surrounded by steaming pots, glowing ovens, and endless preparations. Their success was measured not by applause but by the satisfaction of passengers who often never learned their names. Hundreds of meals had to be prepared with remarkable precision every day, requiring discipline, experience, and perfect coordination. Every loaf of bread, every carefully carved roast, every delicate dessert reflected countless hours of invisible labour carried out beneath the luxurious decks above. Today, surviving menus allow researchers to calculate not only what was served, but also the incredible scale of the operation. Thousands of eggs, hundreds of kilograms of fresh meat, vast quantities of butter, flour, vegetables, fruit, tea, coffee, and dairy products were loaded before the voyage began. Managing these supplies without modern technology required careful planning and constant organisation. The Titanic truly functioned like a floating city, capable of feeding more than 2,000 people while maintaining standards that rivaled the finest restaurants on land. Perhaps this is why the story of Titanic's first-class meals continues to fascinate us. Beyond the famous tragedy lies an extraordinary example of craftsmanship, hospitality, and human ambition. Every preserved menu reminds us that history is not only remembered through great disasters, but also through the quiet moments that came before them. Moments filled with laughter, warm meals, hopeful conversations, and the simple belief that another peaceful day awaited just beyond the horizon. Eventually, every voyage comes to an end, but some journeys continue long after the ship itself has disappeared. The Titanic is one of those rare stories. More than 100 years later, people still study its passengers, its crew, its engineering, and even the meals served in its magnificent dining rooms. That lasting curiosity exists because the Titanic represents something deeply human. It reminds us that history is made not only by extraordinary events, but also by ordinary people living ordinary lives. The passengers who gathered around those elegant tables were simply enjoying another evening. They laughed at familiar jokes, complimented the chefs, discussed tomorrow's plans, and admired the endless ocean outside the windows. They had no way of knowing that their quiet conversations would one day become part of one of the world's most famous historical stories. The surviving menus allow us to pause for a moment and imagine those forgotten evenings with surprising clarity. We can almost hear the gentle clinking of crystal glasses, the soft footsteps of stewards moving carefully between the tables, and the distant sound of music echoing through the ship's luxurious corridors. Warm bread arrives fresh from the ovens. Fragrant coffee fills delicate cups, and beautifully prepared desserts appear one after another. Everything seems peaceful, carefully organised, and wonderfully ordinary. It is precisely this sense of normal life that makes the Titanic so unforgettable. The contrast between those calm moments and what followed only hours later continues to move people across generations. Today, historians no longer view the Titanic simply as a tragic shipwreck. They see it as a snapshot of the Edwardian world at its very peak, a time of confidence, elegance, innovation, and remarkable craftsmanship. The dining experience reflects all of these qualities. Every carefully folded napkin, every polished silver spoon, every thoughtfully prepared course speaks of a society that valued patience, refinement, and attention to detail. Those traditions may seem distant today, yet they continue to inspire modern restaurants, luxury hotels, and cruise ships around the world. Perhaps the greatest lesson hidden within the Titanic's dining rooms is one that reaches beyond history itself. It reminds us that the moments we often overlook, or shared meal, a quiet conversation, a peaceful evening surrounded by friends, or family may, one day become our most precious memories. The passengers aboard the Titanic believed they had many more dinners ahead of them. Instead, those elegant meals became their final chapter aboard the world's most famous ocean liner, leaving behind a timeless story that continues to invite us back to those beautifully lit tables where hope, comfort, and history briefly shared the same place. Before we quietly leave the Titanic behind, there is one final detail worth remembering. The famous first-class meals were never meant to become part of history. They were simply ordinary dinners, enjoyed by ordinary people living extraordinary lives for a few brief days. The chefs who prepared them expected to cook another breakfast the following morning. The stewards believed they would once again arrange spotless tablecloths, polish crystal glasses, and welcome smiling passengers into the dining saloon. Families planned what they would do after arriving in New York. Businessmen reviewed schedules for upcoming meetings. Children looked forward to exploring a new country. Every person aboard believed the future was already waiting for them. History, however, often changes without warning. That is why the surviving menus feel so powerful today. They remind us of a moment frozen in time just before everything changed forever. Reading those carefully printed dishes, we are reminded that every historical event begins with an ordinary day. Someone orders another cup of tea. Another person asks for an extra piece of bread. Friends laugh together over dessert while musicians quietly perform in the background. No one imagines that these simple moments will one day be remembered around the world. Modern researchers continue discovering new information about life aboard the Titanic through letters, diaries, newspaper interviews, and family collections passed down through generations. Every small discovery helps complete the picture of what daily life was truly like aboard the ship. These personal stories reveal that the passengers were far more than names listed on a manifest. They were individuals with dreams, fears, ambitions, and loved ones waiting for them across the Atlantic. Some hoped to begin successful businesses in America. Others planned family reunions after years apart. A few simply wanted a comfortable holiday aboard the finest ship ever built. Their dreams were different, but for a short time they all shared the same elegant dining rooms, the same peaceful ocean views, and the same belief that tomorrow would be another beautiful day at sea. Perhaps that is the true reason why people continue returning to the Titanic's story generation after generation. It is not only because of the tragedy, but because it reminds us how valuable ordinary moments really are. A shared meal, a warm conversation, and a quiet evening surrounded by those we care about may seem small while they are happening, yet they often become the memories that remain with us the longest. The grand dining saloon of the Titanic may now rest in silence beneath the Atlantic Ocean, but the human stories created around its tables continue to live on, inviting each new generation to remember not only how the voyage ended, but also how beautifully it began, as our peaceful journey through the Titanic's grand dining rooms slowly reaches its conclusion. It becomes clear that these elegant meals were about much more than luxury. They reflected an entire way of life that valued patience, craftsmanship, courtesy, and the simple pleasure of gathering around a table with family and friends. Every course was prepared with care, every place setting arranged with precision, and every evening designed to leave passengers with memories they would treasure for years, although fate allowed those memories to last only a few days. They have somehow survived for more than a century through letters, photographs, menus, and the stories handed down from generation to generation. The Titanic reminds us that history is not made only by kings, politicians, or great battles. It is also created by cooks rising before dawn to bake fresh bread, waiters carrying heavy trays through narrow corridors, musicians filling elegant rooms with gentle melodies, and travellers quietly enjoying dinner while watching the sun disappear beyond the Atlantic horizon. These ordinary moments often receive little attention, yet they reveal more about the past than almost anything else. They allow us to imagine the sounds, smells, and emotions of another era with remarkable clarity. If we could step back into that dining room for just a single evening, we might notice details that passengers themselves hardly thought about. The warm glow reflected from crystal glasses, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the gentle movement of the ship beneath our feet, and the calm confidence that tomorrow would bring another beautiful sunrise over the ocean. Those small experiences seemed ordinary at the time, yet they have become extraordinary simply because history preserved them. Perhaps that is why the Titanic continues to speak to people all over the world. It reminds us to appreciate today's quiet moments before they become tomorrow's memories, or shared meal, a peaceful conversation, or a simple evening spent with those we love may not seem important while it is happening. But one day, those ordinary moments may become the stories we remember most clearly. And in that sense, the grand dinners aboard the Titanic have never truly ended. They continue every time someone opens an old menu, studies a faded photograph, or quietly imagines the warm lights of the dining saloon shining across the calm Atlantic on one final unforgettable evening before history changed forever. Even though the Titanic now rests nearly 4,000 meters beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, its story continues to live through the objects that survived and the memories recorded by those who escaped. Among the most fascinating of these are the original menus, which have become treasured historical artifacts. At first glance, they appear to be nothing more than elegant pieces of paper listing soups, fish, meats, desserts, and beverages. Yet historians see something much deeper. Each menu captures a single ordinary day aboard an extraordinary ship. It tells us what people expected from luxury, how they spent their evenings, and what life felt like before history unexpectedly changed their future. When researchers compare the Titanic's menus with those from other ocean liners of the same era, they notice how determined the white Starline was to impress its wealthiest passengers. The company believed that unforgettable service created loyal customers. So enormous effort was invested in every meal. Fresh flowers decorated the tables. Silverware was polished until it reflected the light like a mirror. And every plate was carefully inspected before leaving the kitchen. Such attention to detail created an atmosphere where passengers could forget they were surrounded by thousands of kilometers of open ocean. For many travellers, dinner became the perfect ending to a relaxing day spent reading on deck, walking along the promenade, or enjoying afternoon tea with friends. As evening approached, guests returned to their cabins to dress in elegant clothing before making their way toward the dining saloon. Gentle conversations filled the corridors as people admired one another's evening attire. The room gradually came alive with smiling faces, quiet laughter, and the comforting sound of waiters welcoming guests to their tables. It must have felt like entering one of the world's greatest hotels rather than boarding a ship in the middle of the Atlantic. Perhaps the greatest gift these menus give us today is perspective. They remind us that every person aboard the Titanic was living an ordinary day from their own point of view. Nobody believed they were becoming part of history. They simply enjoyed breakfast, looked forward to dinner, planned tomorrow's activities, and dreamed about the future waiting. In New York, that simple truth makes the story timeless. It encourages us to appreciate the quiet moments in our own lives, because history has shown that ordinary evenings, shared over a meal, can one day become the memories remembered longer than anything else. In the end, the Titanic's famous dining tables tell us not only what the wealthy passengers ate, but also how they lived, how they hoped, and how precious even the simplest moments can become with the passing of time. As we quietly leave the dining room behind and imagine the Titanic continuing across the calm Atlantic, it is impossible not to think about the thousands of small moments that history almost forgot. Every cup of tea poured by a steward, every loaf of bread taken from the oven, every carefully folded napkin, and every friendly conversation between strangers became part of a much larger story than anyone aboard could have imagined. The passengers believed they were simply enjoying one of the finest voyages ever offered. They admired the luxury around them because it felt natural, not because they thought it would one day become famous. That is perhaps the greatest irony of the Titanic. The things that seemed most ordinary to those on board have become the details that fascinate us the most today. Modern historians often explain that understanding everyday life helps us understand history itself. It is easy to remember the dramatic events of April 15th, 1912, but it is equally important to remember the peaceful hours that came before. Those quiet breakfasts, elegant lunches, afternoon teas, and unforgettable dinners reveal what the passengers valued and how they experienced the world around them. The first-class dining rooms represented optimism, confidence, and a belief that technology had made ocean travel safer and more comfortable than ever before. The ship itself was celebrated as a masterpiece of engineering, while its restaurants symbolized refinement and hospitality at the highest level. Today, visitors who see an original Titanic menu behind museum glass often spend several minutes reading every course from beginning to end. They imagine the flavours, the aromas, and the conversations that once filled the room. Some wonder which dessert they would have chosen, while others picture themselves sitting beside one of the large windows, watching the endless Atlantic as another beautifully prepared meal arrived at the table. These simple acts of imagination help keep the human side of the Titanic alive, rather than seeing only a famous shipwreck. we begin to see real people enjoying ordinary moments that suddenly became extraordinary because of history. Perhaps that is the lasting message hidden within every surviving menu. Luxury can disappear, magnificent ships can sink, and even the greatest achievements of human engineering can be lost to time. Yet kindness, shared meals, thoughtful service, and the memories created around a dinner table continue to endure. More than a century later, the Titanic still invites us to slow down, appreciate the people beside us, and remember that the simplest moments are often the ones that remain with us the longest. In that quiet lesson, the story of the Titanic's first-class dining continues its voyage, carrying its memories gently across the generations. Long after the last light in the grand dining saloon faded into history, before we finally say goodbye to the Titanic, there is one last way to appreciate its remarkable dining experience. Instead of focusing only on the luxury itself, we can think about the people who made that luxury possible. Long before the first passengers entered the dining saloon, dozens of bakers had already been working for hours. Fresh bread rose inside enormous ovens. Pastries were carefully prepared by hand. Vegetables were washed and cut with precision, and sauces slowly simmered until they reached exactly the right flavour. Every member of the kitchen staff understood that excellence depended on teamwork. A perfectly cooked meal required hundreds of small tasks, each completed at exactly the right moment. The waiters also carried an enormous responsibility. They memorized the seating arrangements, learned the names of regular passengers whenever possible, and remembered personal preferences so service felt effortless. Their movements through the crowded dining room appeared calm and graceful, even though they balanced heavy trays covered with delicate china, crystal glasses, and polished silver. Guests rarely noticed how much work was happening behind the scenes, because true hospitality often succeeds by making difficult tasks appear simple. Looking back today, it is remarkable that historians have been able to reconstruct so much of this daily routine. Survivor interviews, company records, preserved menus, photographs, and personal letters all contribute small pieces of information that together create an unusually complete picture of life aboard the ship. Few historical events have been documented with such care. As a result, we can imagine not only what passengers ate, but also how they spent their mornings, afternoons, and evenings while crossing the Atlantic. The Titanic's dining experience also reminds us how quickly ordinary routines can become history. A breakfast served on April 14th, 1912, seemed completely unremarkable at the time. Families gathered around the table, enjoyed fresh coffee, warm bread, fruit and eggs, then continued with the rest of their day exactly as they expected. No one realised that historians would one day study those very meals in museums and books. This simple truth gives every surviving menu a quiet emotional power. It transforms a list of dishes into a record of real lives being lived in real time. Perhaps that is the greatest legacy left behind by the Titanic's famous dining rooms. They teach us that history is not only remembered through dramatic headlines or famous names. It is also preserved in everyday experiences shared between ordinary people. A carefully prepared meal, a friendly smile from a waiter, the gentle sound of conversation, and the comfort of sitting together around a table can become timeless memories. More than 100 years later, those moments continue to invite us aboard the Titanic once again, not simply to admire its luxury, but to remember the people who filled its grand dining saloon with warmth, laughter, and hope during the final peaceful days of an unforgettable voyage. As our story gently drifts toward its final chapters, the Titanic reminds us that even the grandest achievements eventually become part of history. In 1912, the ship represented the very best of human ambition. It combined remarkable engineering, luxurious accommodation, and exceptional hospitality into a single floating city unlike anything the world had seen before. Newspapers proudly described it as a symbol of modern progress, and many passengers stepped aboard, believing they were experiencing the future of ocean travel. For a few unforgettable days, that belief seemed completely justified. The dining rooms were filled with delicious aromas, the lounges echoed with friendly conversations, and the elegant corridors reflected an atmosphere of confidence that defined the entire voyage. Yet perhaps the greatest treasure left behind by the Titanic is not its magnificent staircase or its famous first-class menu. It is the opportunity to understand the lives of the people who sailed aboard her. Through preserved letters, journals, menus, and survivor testimonies, we are able to see them not as distant historical figures, but as ordinary human beings. They celebrated birthdays, worried about business, missed their families, laughed with friends, and looked forward to new beginnings across the Atlantic. These simple emotions connect us with them across more than a century of history. Although technology, fashion, and society have changed dramatically, hope, curiosity, and the desire to share a peaceful meal with loved ones remain exactly the same. This may explain why so many people continue returning to the Titanic's story. The ship reminds us that history is built from countless ordinary moments woven together. A waiter quietly serving another cup of coffee, a child tasting an unfamiliar dessert for the first time, or an elderly couple watching the sunset after dinner may seem insignificant on their own. Together, however, these moments create the true memory of life aboard the ship. They allow us to picture the Titanic not only as a famous wreck beneath the Atlantic, but also as a living place filled with laughter, music, conversation, and the comforting rhythm of everyday life. As we quietly leave the dining saloon one final time, the tables have already been cleared, the lights grow softer, and the sounds of conversation slowly fade into silence. Beyond the windows, the Atlantic stretches endlessly beneath a sky filled with stars, just as it did on that peaceful April evening more than a century ago. The meals have ended, the passengers have returned to their cabins, and the great ship continues steadily through the darkness, unaware that its name will soon become one of the most remembered in history. And perhaps that is the quiet beauty of this story. Long before the Titanic became a legend, it was simply a place where people gathered around a table, shared good food, enjoyed each other's company, and believed tomorrow would arrive just like any other day. There is one final image that historians often invite us to imagine. The evening meal has ended. The dining room is becoming quieter, and the last few passengers remain seated as they finish their coffee and dessert. Outside the large windows, the Atlantic is calm and almost perfectly still. The stars shine with unusual brightness because there are no city lights anywhere on the horizon. Inside, the atmosphere remains warm and comfortable. Stewards quietly collect empty plates. Musicians perform soft melodies, and gentle conversations continue around the room. It feels like the perfect ending to another peaceful day aboard the greatest ocean liner of its time. No one notices how quickly an ordinary evening can become history. The people sitting around those beautifully decorated tables are thinking about tomorrow. Some are planning shopping trips in New York. Others are preparing for important business meetings, while families discuss the exciting adventures that await them after reaching America. Children grow sleepy after a long day exploring the ship, and parents begin leading them back toward their cabins. Elderly couples take one last slow walk through the elegant corridors before retiring for the night. Everything feels calm, familiar, and wonderfully ordinary. This is perhaps the most emotional part of the Titanic story. We already know what will happen next, yet the passengers do not. They continue smiling, talking, and making plans because they have every reason to believe they are completely safe. The ship has been praised around the world for its size, comfort, and modern technology. Confidence surrounds everyone on board, from the wealthiest first-class traveller to the hard-working members of the crew. For a brief moment, it seems as though nothing could possibly disturb the peaceful rhythm of life at sea. More than a century later, these quiet scenes remain just as fascinating as the tragedy itself. They remind us that history is made up of ordinary evenings that unexpectedly become unforgettable. A shared dinner, a warm cup of coffee, a simple conversation with a stranger, or a final walk beneath a sky filled with stars may appear insignificant while they are happening. Yet, with the passing of time, those ordinary moments become priceless memories. The story of what the rich passengers ate aboard the Titanic is therefore not only about luxury or expensive food. It is about the people who gathered together around those elegant tables, enjoying life one peaceful evening at a time, completely unaware that they were living through the final chapter of one of the most unforgettable voyages in human history. As we reflect on everything we have discovered, one question quietly remains. Why do people continue talking about the Titanic's meals after more than 100 years? The answer may be simpler than it first appears. Food has always brought people together. It marks celebrations, begins friendships, comforts families, and creates memories that often last a lifetime. The grand dinners aboard the Titanic represented all of these things. They were moments when strangers became friends, families laughed together, and travellers briefly forgot the endless ocean surrounding them. Every carefully prepared course reflected hope rather than fear, because no one expected the voyage to become part of history. The menus also reveal the incredible confidence people placed in progress. During the early 20th century, the Titanic was viewed as the ultimate achievement of modern engineering, while its luxurious restaurants demonstrated what many believed civilization had accomplished. Fresh ingredients could now cross oceans. Electric lights illuminated magnificent dining rooms, and talented chefs recreated the finest European cuisine thousands of kilometers from land. To the passengers, This seemed like proof that the future would only become more comfortable and more advanced. Few stopped to consider that nature still possessed the power to surprise even humanity's greatest achievements. When historians read passenger letters today, they often notice how many people describe the food with genuine excitement. Some wrote home about elegant dinners unlike anything they had ever experienced. Others admired the courtesy of the waiters or the beauty of the dining rooms. These personal accounts remind us that luxury is remembered not only through expensive objects, but through thoughtful service and meaningful experiences. Long after the silverware disappeared beneath the sea, the memories of kindness, hospitality, and shared meals continued to survive. In the words of those who lived through the voyage, perhaps that is the most comforting lesson hidden within this story. Ships may vanish, buildings may fade, and generations may pass, but the simple moments shared between people can continue to inspire those who come long after. Every preserved menu from the Titanic quietly tells us that ordinary evenings deserve to be appreciated while we are living them. A peaceful dinner, a friendly conversation, the laughter of loved ones, and the warmth of sitting together around a table are gifts that often seem small until they become memories. In that quiet way, the Titanic's first-class dining experience continues to sail across history, reminding us that behind every famous event are ordinary people simply enjoying another beautiful evening, believing that tomorrow would arrive just as peacefully as today. As the Titanic slowly faded into history, its dining rooms disappeared from the world, but the ideas they represented never truly vanished. Luxury liners built in the decades that followed continued to create importance on elegant restaurants, attentive service, and carefully prepared meals, because passengers had come to expect far more than simple transportation. The Titanic had helped define what a first-class voyage should feel like. Even today, many cruise ships still follow traditions that began more than a century ago, including formal dinners, multiple-course menus, afternoon tea, and beautifully decorated dining rooms. In this way, a small part of the Titanic continues to sail across the oceans, carried forward through traditions rather than steel. When historians speak about the ship, they often remind us that luxury alone was never the true reason people remembered it. Instead, it is the human stories hidden behind that luxury that continue to capture our imagination. Every chair in the dining saloon was once occupied by someone with hopes for the future. Some passengers dreamed of expanding their businesses in America, while others planned family reunions after years apart. Newly married couples imagined the homes they would build together, and children looked forward to exploring a country they had only seen on maps. Around every table sat people whose lives were filled with ordinary dreams, making their story deeply familiar even after more than 100 years. Perhaps the greatest value of studying the Titanic's meals is that they remind us how history can be understood through everyday life. We often focus on famous dates and dramatic events, yet the smallest details sometimes reveal the most. A breakfast menu tells us what ingredients were available. A dinner invitation shows us how people socialized. A survivor's memory of fresh bread or warm coffee reminds US that even during history's most famous voyagers, life was built from simple routines repeated every day. These quiet details help transform the Titanic from a distant historical event into a living place, filled with real people, as we imagine the final peaceful evening aboard the ship. The dining room remains bright, elegant, and full of gentle conversation. Outside, the Atlantic stretches endlessly beneath a sky crowded with stars, while inside, guests continue enjoying one last cup of tea before returning to their cabins. It is a scene of complete calm, untouched by fear or uncertainty. That peaceful image has become one of the most meaningful parts of the Titanic's legacy because it reminds us that history often changes in a single unexpected moment. Until that moment arrives, life continues exactly as it always has, filled with shared meals, quiet conversations, hopeful dreams, and the comforting belief that tomorrow will be another ordinary day. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Titanic is that it continues to teach us lessons that have very little to do with ships themselves. It reminds us how quickly ordinary life can become history and how the smallest details are often the ones that survive the longest. A handwritten dinner menu, a carefully folded napkin, a waiter remembering a guest's favourite drink, or the aroma of fresh bread drifting through the corridor may have seemed completely unimportant in April 1912, yet today these quiet moments help us understand the people aboard the ship far better than statistics ever could. They show us a world where elegance was expressed through patience, careful craftsmanship, and genuine hospitality. If we close our eyes for just a moment, it is easy to imagine another peaceful evening aboard the Titanic. The dining room is alive with soft conversation while the orchestra plays gentle melodies in the background. Crystal glasses catch the warm light from the chandeliers, creating tiny reflections across the polished tables. Stewards move gracefully between guests, serving one beautifully prepared course after another with quiet confidence. Outside the windows, the Atlantic appears calm and endless, its dark waters blending almost perfectly with the night sky. There is no sign of danger, only the comforting rhythm of the engines carrying the ship steadily toward New York. For the passengers, these moments represented the future they had imagined for themselves. Every dinner brought them one day closer to new opportunities, family reunions, business ventures, or exciting adventures waiting across the ocean. They discussed tomorrow with complete confidence because there was no reason to think otherwise. That simple optimism is one of the most touching parts of the Titanic story. It reminds us that every generation believes tomorrow will arrive exactly as planned, even though history often follows a different path. Today, more than a century later, the ship dining experience continues to fascinate millions because it represents far more than luxury. It represents humanity itself. Around those elegant tables sat people from different countries, backgrounds and professions, all sharing the universal experience of enjoying a meal together. They laughed, listened, celebrated, and dreamed without realizing they were creating memories that would outlive the ship itself. In the end, perhaps that is the greatest legacy of the Titanic's famous dining rooms. They remind us that while magnificent ships may disappear beneath the sea, the simple human moments created aboard them can continue, sailing through history forever, carried not by the ocean, but by the memories of generations who refuse to let those stories fade away. As we take one final slow walk through the corridors of the Titanic, it becomes easier to understand why this ship has never been forgotten. Its story is not preserved only because of the tragedy that ended its voyage, but because it captured an entire world that no longer exists. The first-class dining rooms were filled with traditions that had been carefully developed over generations. Every dinner followed a graceful rhythm. Guests arrived dressed in elegant evening clothes. Stewards welcomed them with quiet courtesy. Musicians filled the air with gentle melodies. And chefs presented each course with remarkable precision. It was an experience designed to celebrate not only fine food, but also the pleasure of spending time together. In an age before television, smartphones, or the internet, conversation itself was one of the evening's greatest entertainments. Families spoke about their travels. Friends exchanged stories, and strangers often left the table knowing one another far better than when the meal began. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Titanic's dining experience was the incredible level of preparation required behind the scenes. Every ingredient had to be carefully stored, every recipe timed perfectly, and every member of the kitchen staff trusted to perform their role without hesitation. Bakers, butchers, pastry chefs, cleaners, waiters, and supervisors all worked together like the parts of a finely crafted clock. Passengers rarely noticed this invisible effort because true excellence often feels effortless to those experiencing it. That quiet professionalism became one of the defining characteristics of life aboard the ship. Today, historians continue to study these ordinary routines because they reveal something deeply meaningful about the people who lived during the Edwardian era. Their world moved at a gentler pace. Meals were occasions to be enjoyed rather than hurried through. A beautifully prepared dinner represented respect for guests, pride in craftsmanship, and appreciation for good company. Although the world has changed enormously since 1912, those values still feel familiar. They remind us that some parts of human nature remain constant regardless of time. As our journey through the Titanic's famous dining room slowly comes to a close, perhaps the greatest memory we carry with us is not a particular dish or an elegant menu, but the atmosphere itself. The warm lights reflected from crystal glasses, the quiet laughter shared across beautifully decorated tables, the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, and the calm confidence of people believing tomorrow would be another peaceful day at sea. These simple moments have outlived the ship because they speak to something timeless. They remind us that history is not only found in dramatic events but also in ordinary evenings, filled with hope, kindness, and the simple joy of sharing a meal together. And in that gentle way, the story of what the rich passengers ate aboard the Titanic continues to nourish our imagination, inviting each new generation to step aboard once more and experience, if only for a little while, the elegance of a world that has long since slipped beneath the waves. If there is one final thought worth carrying away from the Titanic, It is that every object preserved from the ship tells a human story. A simple dinner plate reminds us of the hands that carefully prepared the meal. A silver spoon recalls the conversations shared across the table. An elegant menu speaks of anticipation rather than tragedy. Because when it was printed, everyone expected the voyage to end in celebration. Historians often say that artifacts become meaningful only when we remember the people connected to them. The Titanic's dining rooms are a perfect example of this idea. They were not remarkable simply because of expensive ingredients or beautiful decorations. They were remarkable because they brought people together, allowing strangers to become friends and families to create memories that would remain with survivors for the rest of their lives. Even today, when modern chefs recreate the Titanic's famous first-class dinners, guests often discover something unexpected. The food itself is delicious, but the greatest experience comes from slowing down instead of rushing through a meal. They spend time talking, listening, and appreciating each carefully prepared course. For a few hours they experience a rhythm of life that has almost disappeared from the modern world. In many ways, this may be the true legacy of the Titanic's dining tradition. It reminds us that sharing a meal is about much more than eating. It is about conversation, connection, and enjoying the company of others without distraction. The passengers aboard the Titanic could never have imagined that their ordinary routines would one day become the subject of books, museums, and documentaries watched by millions of people around the world. Yet, because of that unexpected twist of history, we are able to step back into their world and appreciate the beauty hidden within everyday life. We can almost hear the quiet music, smell the fresh bread coming from the ovens, and picture the warm light reflecting from polished crystal as another peaceful evening unfolds aboard the ship. Perhaps that is why the Titanic continues to fascinate generation after generation. It reminds us that behind every great historical event are ordinary people living ordinary lives, enjoying simple pleasures and making plans for tomorrow. Their story encourages us to value our own quiet moments just as much as life's extraordinary ones. A family dinner, a conversation with friends, or a peaceful evening shared with loved ones may seem ordinary today. But one day those moments could become the memories we treasure most. In Zenza, the grooms of the Titanic still have something meaningful to teach us, not only about history, but also about how to appreciate the present while it quietly becomes the past. As our voyage through the Titanic's dining experience gently continues, one detail becomes impossible to ignore. The ship was built to create unforgettable memories, not only through its size or luxury, but through the feeling it gave every passenger from the moment they stepped aboard. The first-class dining saloon perfectly reflected that vision. Every evening, as the orchestra began to play and the first guests entered the room, there was a sense that something special was about to happen. The waiters greeted familiar faces with warm smiles. Chairs were quietly pulled out, and the first course arrived with perfect timing. To those seated at the tables, everything seemed effortless. Yet behind every elegant dinner stood hours of careful planning and extraordinary teamwork. Many of the recipes served aboard the Titanic had been inspired by the finest restaurants in London and Paris, French cooking was regarded as the highest standard of luxury. So the chefs combined traditional British ingredients with classic French techniques. Riche consommé fishes, perfectly roasted meats, fresh vegetables, and beautifully crafted desserts appeared one after another, each designed to complement the previous course. Guests were encouraged to enjoy the experience slowly, appreciating every flavour while sharing conversation with those around them. There was no need to rush because the voyage itself was part of the adventure. The dining room also reflected the social customs of its time. Gentlemen were expected to wear formal evening dress, while ladies arrived in elegant gowns decorated with lace, silk, or sparkling jewellery. Dinner was more than a meal. It was an important social occasion where people introduced themselves, exchanged ideas, and strengthened friendships. Some passengers met future business partners during these evenings, while others simply enjoyed hearing stories from travellers who had visited distant parts of the world. In many ways, the dining tables became places where lives briefly crossed before, continuing in different directions. Looking back today, it is remarkable how these quiet moments have survived longer than anyone could have imagined. The magnificent ship may rest deep beneath the Atlantic, but the atmosphere of those elegant evenings still lives on through preserved menus, photographs, diaries, and the memories of survivors. They allow us to picture a world where time seemed to move more slowly, where meals were enjoyed without hurry, and where every dinner ended with the comforting belief that another beautiful day at sea would soon begin. Perhaps that peaceful feeling, more than anything else, is what keeps drawing people back to the story of the Titanic, generation after generation. And so, our quiet evening aboard the Titanic finally comes to an end. The dining room has grown almost silent now. The last cups of coffee have been cleared away. The orchestra has finished its final melody, and the stewards carefully straighten the empty chairs before preparing for another day they believe will soon begin. Outside, the Atlantic remains calm beneath a sky filled with countless stars, its dark waters stretching endlessly in every direction. It is difficult to imagine a more peaceful scene. Every passenger retires to bed carrying thoughts of tomorrow. Some dream about reuniting with loved ones in New York, others think about new business opportunities, exciting adventures, or simply the comfort of arriving safely after a pleasant voyage. None of them know that this beautiful evening will become one of their final peaceful memories aboard the most famous ship ever built. More than 100 years have passed since those lights shone across the polished tables. Yet the story continues to captivate millions of people around the world. Not because the meals were the most expensive ever served, or because the dining room was among the grandest ever constructed, but because it reminds us of something deeply human. Every great historical event is made up of ordinary moments that once seemed completely unimportant. A shared dinner, a warm smile from a waiter, a quiet laugh between friends, or the comforting smell of freshly baked bread can become priceless memories when viewed through the passage of time. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the Titanic's first-class dining experience. It teaches us to appreciate the simple moments we often overlook, the conversations we have today, the meals we share with family, the evenings spent together without hurry, and the ordinary days we sometimes take for granted may one day become the memories we treasure most. History is not only written by great events, it is also written by quiet evenings like this one, when people gather around a table, enjoy each other's company, and believe that tomorrow will arrive just as peacefully as today. Thank you for joining me on this gentle journey through one of history's most fascinating dining rooms. I hope this story helped you imagine what life was really like aboard the Titanic before its unforgettable final night. Now, as the lights slowly fade, the ocean grows quiet once more, and the great ship continues its timeless voyage through our imagination. Wherever you are, I hope you have a peaceful evening, a restful night, and perhaps, just like the calm Atlantic before midnight, pleasant dreams that carry you gently into sleep. Good night.